least it sounds unique. Hello, Mandy.
Hello.
Let's see here. I got Mandy and Kay and Kayla. Yep. There we go, just like that. Anybody got anything new and exciting, short of mania?
Got a new dog in the family.
Oh yeah?
Roxy. Yeah, I know it's hard to see, but
Oh, there you go.
she's sweet.
Was it a rescue?
Yeah, she's from Texas.
Mm.
So I'm a home.
That'll make her good.
It's not my dog. It's the guy that I work for, but I get to watch her, so I kind of pretend it's my dog. You know?
Texas dog got to be better than any place else.
Yeah.
Maybe.
My roommate said no dogs allowed at the house, so I gotta take what I can get.
Get a new roommate.
Right. Well, he's also the landlord, so.
Ah, well, get a new landlord. There you go. I just take, you're the problem solver. You told me that.
Right.
Solve the problem.
Boom.
All right. Here comes Teresa. We're almost here. There, oh, that's Aisha still. Rachel's coming in. There's Rachel.
Hi, perfect.
How are you?
Good. How about you?
Good.
Good.
Teresa, did you see my email this morning?
I did.
Okay.
Can you hear
If
me?
you want to ask about it, yep. If you want to ask about it, you save it till the end. I'll be happy to explain what I'm talking about.
No, I figured it out. Rachel also texted me, so I made corrections. I know what you were saying.
Okay.
I actually have a question, maybe by the end of the class.
Okay. All right, we're waiting for Michaela, and we're waiting for Ariel here anymore. Desharo. Well, we'll give them a couple more minutes and then off. Anyway, in the meantime, you got questions on anything before we get started? If you've got project questions, perhaps like Rachel. Let's see, there comes Michaela. All right, we're in there. And I don't know where the share is, but I guess we'll probably ought to get started.
You can learn how to,
Who's got the male in the room making talking? Must be Aisha. The people in the room talking?
Oh yeah, my bad.
Just not bad. We like language. That's why we study linguistics and stuff. But anyway, I'll tell you what, let's do. Let's go ahead and get started. It may not take the whole hour today. And as always, I will wait till the end. If you've got questions that you want to bring up at the end, feel free to do that. If you've got any introductory questions, we can catch those here before we continue on. See, there's Kayla, always smiling. Always, but some of you don't smile. There's Teresa smiling. Emma's trying very hard not to smile. We can't tell what Aisha's doing, but we'll assume it's a smile. All right, very good. Okay, let's go ahead. What I wanted to do is you should have read the chapter on specific techniques, and I just kind of want to go through those. Not only have you read them, but hopefully you've also included as I recall, you have to include 3 very explicitly in your presentation materials or in your lesson materials. And so hopefully you'll get those, because that's at least an extra credit. And there we go. So the final exam will be available to you at 1 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday. So you'll have an opportunity to print it off and bring it to our last class on Wednesday. Well, it's not our last class, but our next class on Wednesday. And what I want to do on Wednesday is briefly go through the exam so that you know what's there and you have an opportunity to ask me questions. So my preference would be, if you have gone through and looked it over before we actually start the class, that'll be helpful because we can cover the questions more quickly. But we will review what's on there so that hopefully you won't have any questions. But if you do, you know where to go and talk, or who you go and talk to. Final is going to be due the next Tuesday. So that's a week from tomorrow. And it will be due just before midnight at 11:59. I will remind you that there shouldn't be any collaboration with your colleagues in the class or consultation with other people like tutors or instructors, but I am available to you. Only I, meaning if you've got questions, you really need to bring them to me. I'm more than happy to respond to them. I'm more than happy to help you figure out if you've got things right or wrong. Some of you called me last time or got in touch with me and things went very well. Some others probably should have. So I will just suggest to you that if you didn't last time, maybe you want to do it so this time. And I'm going to be available. So my regular office hours, we'll talk on Wednesday. This week, tomorrow and Wednesday, I've got regular office hours, but Thursday, Monday, and Tuesday are going to be my regular office hours. So you've got the opportunity to get in touch with me. I'm also available by email and phone most of the time. I may not get back to you immediately, but I'll get back to you relatively soon if you've got questions. And you can also try texting me, which is generally good, but sometimes I put my phone in the charger in another room and I don't realize the text has come through. So any of those methods are there. You shouldn't hesitate. We're about at the end of the semester. I want you to make sure that you make this a learning experience as well as getting a good score on it, okay? So that's kind of where we're at with the final exam. Now, we are going to meet Wednesday, and we will meet again next Monday, a week from today. That's the last official day of classes, and that's when we'll meet. And then your next to-do is to have the final exam done by Tuesday. But you'll have a whole week to work on it. And the things that we cover between now and Wednesday aren't going to be on the exam anyway. So, which generally, stuff we talk about today a little bit, but Wednesdays won't be. And so you'll have a week really to work on that. Okay? All right. Now, I also wrote you this morning and said there is a course evaluation. I'm sure you've all done course evaluations before. I wrote you a note and said incorrectly there was going to had to be done by Tuesday. In fact, it has to be done by Monday. So if you go out there and you do it real fast, then I won't write anybody any more emails. And as I said, if I get everybody to respond, I'll add an extra point onto everybody's score, which is 10% of a letter grade all by itself. So it's to your advantage to do that. Now, I do use the information you give me on there to change the way I do the class, change the materials, to change the scheduling and so forth. So they're really important for me so that I can understand what you think and you have an opportunity to tell me what you think, okay? But on Wednesday at 1 in the morning, you've got the final exam and it's in week 15's folder. It'll be due a week from tomorrow before midnight. And essentially, I'm around so that you can collaborate with me, but you can't collaborate with anybody else. We good?
Mm-mm.
All right. So let's get on to today's topic. Today's topic, we want to talk about specific techniques for teaching grammar.
No, you're not getting it. Get away. I'm in class. My
We
camera
spend a lot
gone.
of time looking at
No.
large
Get out.
because most of you have been speaking English all your life.
Diane,
Those who
can you go
haven't
down?
probably
You
actually
in class.
studied grammar. But for
No
the
way.
people who have
No, you're
been
not.
speaking English forever, in many cases,
Go
you
get the
haven't had
charger
a
from
lot of
Mr. Fetty
grammar
room charger
instruction.
computer.
And so as we looked at from the very beginning, you know how to use the language, you can use the grammar properly, but you tend to have a problem being able to explain it because nobody ever probably explained it to you. You just acquired it, as you'll think of the kinds of terms you use in TESL 341. So you acquired it. It probably wasn't taught to you when you were, if you were as old as me, they used to teach grammar very specifically. But quite honestly, even though I was taught it as a kid,
Not now.
I didn't think it was very important. I didn't
Oh,
learn it very well.
sorry.
And so I had to learn how to make these explanations within the
No.
last 12 years. You've got the same issue. So what we want to do is look at some specific techniques we should keep in mind. You remember that you've got 3
Oh.
that have to
Oh.
be showing up in the presentation for extra credit. I will tell you that you're
No,
also
go ahead.
going to have to give me a number of specific techniques in one of the questions on the final exam. So not only is this important for your future, but it's important for the things that are coming up near term, like the exam and the presentation. Okay? So what are some things that we should do? Well, I'm going to start with this one, right? I'm going to walk through all 25 of these. Start without a book. Well, how are you going to start without a book? How are you going to start a lesson? How would you start a lesson without a book?
Kind of conversationally.
You could do it conversationally. What do you mean by that?
Like you use sentences to talk normally to your students, and you incorporate the words or phrases that you want them to learn so that they can kind of learn them through example instead of just like, pointing them out.
Great. Okay. Good idea. So you use the conversation, you use the grammar topic in the conversations so that they begin to recognize them, not sit around and try to memorize the list of rules. I like that. How else can you do it? How else can you start a lesson without a book? Teresa, what do you think? Oh, okay, Aisha, you go.
I was gonna say maybe videos.
Okay, you could start with a video. So the one that comes to mind is probably something like what is that, Schoolhouse Rock, and what's your conjunction, junction, what's your function? Okay, great. That's a good interest grabber. That should get some students really ready to go. How else could you do it? Teresa, got any ideas?
Yeah, you can, write a sentence on a chalkboard or whiteboard, giving an example, or you can even just start it conversationally, like Aiden.
Okay. Sure. So one way of doing it is conversational. Another way is using a video or an audio or something else that you want to do. And you can also use the blackboard. Sometimes that's the way to do it. You write out a sentence and you ask a very specific question about a grammar point that's embedded in the sentence. It does not require that you always start your class by, okay, let's turn to page 27 and start looking. Grab their interest with something more interesting than the textbook, and there are lots of ways of doing that. Okay, so that's one idea. We don't have to depend on a textbook entirely. No, I tend to use a textbook a lot when I teach TESL because usually I find that the people who have written it have had lots of time to research what really is needed. They have had the time to make sure that they got the examples done well. They've had people edit it. and they've had time to plan out in detail what they want to accomplish. So I use the book a lot, but it doesn't require that we start there every day. We can easily use all of these 3 methods and many more that these people have brought up. For instance, we could ask a question. Why do I say, how many bags do you have? And why do I say, how much money do you have? Why is it how many and how much? Some languages, there wouldn't be a difference. But that would be a perfectly good place to start with questions, oftentimes grab people's interest. Another one, use content that is relevant. So let's see, what are the typical interests of your intended students? Emma, if I were to ask you what grade level you're kind of focused on, or you think you want to work in, what grade level would that be?
The I think first or second.
First or second grade. What do you think kids in the first and second grade are interested in?
Kind of like moving around,
Okay.
like craft stuff, like songs, basically.
Okay, so from the standpoint of the things to do, they like things with movement, they like crafts and making things. How about the subjects, though? What kind of subjects do you think they're interested in the first and second grade?
Probably. Actually, I'm gonna think about that.
Okay, that's fine. Rachel, you're next on the list. Well, that's not a fair question for you. I'm going to come back to you for middle school. Aisha, are you teaching the lower grades?
No, I got 5th grade.
You're in the 5th grade? Who else is a lower grade person? Teresa, what are those first and second graders going to be interested in?
Just like the basics, learning the basics of anything.
Mhm.
You know, they're gonna want something that they want something fun.
Yeah. So what would they think is fun? And again, what I'm trying to get at is what kind of topics? You can build a lesson to teach the basics anytime. What kind of topics? Are they going to be interested in, let's see, physics? No, probably not. What are they interested in, though?
Like whatever's going on right now.
Okay, so sometimes current events. My thinking is they're big into things like superheroes and perhaps.
Princesses.
And what was that one?
Princesses.
Yes, exactly. So princesses on the girl side, guys probably interested in the violent superheroes that go out and slaughter their enemies and all that kind of stuff, which makes it maybe a little hard to get it in there. But sometimes we can make the content relevant by letting them use grammar to talk about, to write about the topics that they're interested in. Now, Rachel, one would guess that by the time you get up towards middle school, they're not going to be very, well, some of them will be, but others will have grown out of the superhero phase. What do you think junior high school students are interested in?
Well, like you say, the hero, or maybe, their favorite person,
Okay.
or their ideal sport,
All right. Sports is another good one.
and the book. What's their favorite book?
Okay. What books they're reading? What movies are out there? Anybody here at high school?
I was about to say they might be interested in like TikTok and music, so if you could like turn it into something like that, then they'll catch on better.
Great. Okay. So music of various kinds, hip hop or rap or various other things that they might be interested in. Now, you guys, does anybody here, I may have asked this question, does anybody here know the words to Bubba Shot the Jukebox? No. I asked that question last spring and somebody popped their hand up and they knew all the words. Bubba Shot Jukebox. Ah, it's a country classic. Anyway, not many people would admit knowing what it is, even if they did. But music is another great way to do things. The movies that are the current movies, whether they're science fiction movies or whatever, they start getting interested in the opposite gender by the time they get into middle school. So that's always a topic that you can use if you're careful. But recognize that what little kids are interested in is going to be different than what middle school and high school and even adults, if you end up teaching adults, are going to be interested in. And it's important to try to wrap your lessons around those kinds of things. If you got a bunch of adults, you might wrap it around home life or kids, how they take care of kids or what kind of jobs they have. All of those things are relevant to your students. Maintain their attention better than if you just come up with textbook stuff. Aiden, were you going to say something?
Yeah, there's like I forget the name, but there's a newspaper that's written in very, very simple English for ESL adults, because like you don't want to give them like a children's book, right? Even if that's their level of vocabulary, you want to give them something that's, like you said, relevant.
Sure. And not only relevant, and that could be relevant, but the other part of that is at their capability level. So you brought that up as well. So that's great. Okay. But it's got to be relevant, particularly with adults. Adults who want to sit around and probably study a bunch of theoretical silliness. They want things that they can apply in their jobs or to help them get better jobs. The third thing here is find a real task for practicing a grammar point. Find a real task for practicing a grammar point. Every time you just hand somebody a worksheet, fill in the blanks worksheet is probably not something that we would classify as a real task, because it's been a long time since anybody told me to sit down and do a worksheet. And it's just not something that I typically end up having to do. And for your kids in grammar school or middle school and high school, similarly, if we can take the grammar point that we are trying to make and make it into a real task, we'll get their engagement much better. So let's start. It doesn't matter which grade level we talk about. Let's see, do I have anybody else I'm missing frequently? Oh, there we go. Let us see. Kayla, how might we find a real task for practicing the use of the past tense of a verb? What could we do? What could we do with that? Real task, past tense.
Well, maybe we can ask them what they did for over the weekend and have them either write a sentence or say a sentence.
Great, that's two ways we can deal with it. They can sit down and talk it through by asking them, what did you do this weekend? What you did this weekend is pretty surely going to be in the past tense. It's going to be hard not to. And we can do that verbally by asking them and having them say it in front of the class. We could sit down and have them sit next to a partner and tell the partner what they did last week or over the summer or even that morning. What did you have to do to get ready for school today? Lots of things we could do. We could turn this thing around and say, how are we going to practice the future tense? And we could do almost exactly the same thing. Have them talk about what they're going to be when they grow up or what they're going to do this summer, because we're kind of rolling into the summer for lots of school districts. Now's a perfect time to say, what will you be doing? And you can put this into real situation. If you wanted to teach listening for adults, one way to do that is to have mock interviews so that they have to listen carefully to a question and then respond to that question appropriately. So there are any number of these things that we could do to help them with their grammar. It's a lot like the stuff for anybody who's already taken 341 or 340. One of the things they talk about there in the communicative approach, if you've heard of that before, is they want you to use authentic materials. So authentic materials could be something as mundane as a train schedule or a menu or an online shopping experience. All of those things are putting grammar right into a real life task. So keep that in mind. It's a lot better than having make-up stuff that doesn't really apply to your students just because it's in the textbook, right? Now, here's one, also for those who've already had 340 and 341. You probably heard of the audiolingual method. And the audiolingual method was all wrapped around drills. And you never use the new language, and you just drill people and make them repeat. And as you might remember from either of those two courses, that turned out not to be very effective, and it's certainly not very interesting. But that doesn't mean that we can't use drills to our advantage. Probably the thing that we've got to do differently is make them very brief and very specific on a set of topics or sentence type or any other kind of grammar thing. For small groups of items that easily get confused, if I was going to have to take Spanish, they would have to give me some rapid language drills in the difference between por and pa. And perhaps if we had Spanish-speaking students, we might find it useful to be able to give rapid drills, simply differentiating the times that I use on and the times that I use in. Because very frequently, they're going to have a similar problem from that perspective. Look for the things that are easily confused and use rapid language drills that only last maybe a few seconds. And certainly at a few minutes at most. And so I've given you a couple of examples that I can think of. I'm sure you can think of others where your students just have problems differentiating between this grammar approach or point and another one that's very close to it. Now, here's one that we haven't done during this class, okay? And that's been purposeful in my part for you guys, and that is I want to limit grammar terminology because for you as the upcoming teachers, you have to have a grasp of what that terminology is. It's important for you to know the difference between a transitive verb and an intransitive one, or the difference between a subject complement and a direct object. They're different. They do different things. And at some point, you're likely to have to explain those to your students. You may have to look them up. And I would say you've got a textbook, you've got the internet, you can go out and look up what the explanation is. But when you've got English language learners who aren't necessarily very tied in with the formal grammar of their own language, it's important for you to be able to explain things without using a lot of technical terminology. In terms of transitive verbs and saying this is a transitive verb, you say this is a verb that is going to be acting on something else, like he threw the ball. The throw or the threw is acting on something else, like the direct object. But if you have a verb like sleep, it doesn't affect anything else. And so sleep is built, a sentence with sleep is going to be built differently than a sentence with throw. Now, if you can do that, you still need to understand what these are because your explanations that you look up are no doubt going to use these kinds of terms, but your students may find little value in them. Now, sort out and consolidate new grammar information. How would we do that? Give me an example. Where could we sort out and consolidate new grammar information? Think of a topic that's got 2 or 3 categories in it. And how could we go in there and group these things together? Anybody got an idea? Kayla, I think I haven't called on you yet. Oh, I skipped over Kay Dukes. Oh well, Michaela, how could we do this? What kinds of things might we talk about where we could separate these into different categories and make sure that we talked about one and not the other?
Thank you.
Probably make sure that they know which categories we're focusing on.
Like what? What place could we do it? Any place where you can think of 2 different kinds of things that are related. Nothing?
Nothing comes up. Is there something specific?
Jay Deuce, we're back to you. What can you think of that you could break into categories and make sure you deal with separately?
Yeah, I'm with Michaela. I don't know exactly what you're asking for here.
Okay, I'll go then. Let's take the idea of prepositions of time. Okay, now there are lots of prepositions, right? There are prepositions of time, prepositions of location. There are those that I just kind of call grammatical prepositions like for and of. If we wanted to go in and focus in just on the prepositions of time, then what are we going to be doing? Well, we're probably going to focus down onto maybe 4 words. We're going to talk about in, because, we're going to talk about in February. And we're going to go in there and we're going to talk about at 9 o'clock. So in and at are going to be a couple of different times. And on might be another good one because, sooner or later we're going to have to hit on Monday. And maybe the one last one that I can think of that we might want to use here for talking about these time prepositions would be about. It's about 5 minutes. We're going to be there about 5 o'clock. Now, think about that. Put those up there and you can actually focus on those, even knowing that there's another 20 prepositions out there that they're going to have to know at some point. But if you can keep them focused on just the one, then you're able to consolidate their understanding around that particular category and separate out things that don't apply, like of and for and upon and let's see, those are the ones that come to mind. Despite. I mean, all of those are prepositions, but let's focus in on just this. How about if we're going to be, I'll talk about it in number 9 in a minute, because it'll be a similar thing. But the idea of break this stuff up into pieces that we can focus on without getting them all mixed up with everything else. That'll make a big difference in their understanding. Now, consider first language interference. How many people have already had 341? You had 341? Emma's had it? Anybody else? Michaela, have you had it? Tashara, have you had it?
No, I haven't.
You're in it now?
I said no, I have not.
Oh, you haven't? How about Aisha? I've only got a few people that I can look at. Kayla?
Yes, I had it.
You had it, great. What's first language interference? What's interference? Me in the middle of your day. I know. But beyond me in the middle of your day, what else is interference? Where does interference from language show up? Oh, I'm having a tough day today.
First language
Like
interference.
Aisha, go ahead.
I was gonna say like if two people
What
speak
the
two
heck
different
you do to
languages,
it?
they may
Let me see.
understand each other, but like that interference.
No,
Or you can't understand the other
that could be
person.
interference. I agree with you, but first language interference is a
Now you
little
get to
more
know that.
specific. Hayden, what is it?
Remember?
It's if your first language has different rules and conventions than the language you're learning, and then those principles contradict. So like, well.
Now
yeah,
you want
I
the
think
body?
That's a good one. Okay, so that works. What are the students
I
that
was gonna say,
Go ahead,
The
Aisha.
floppy in the middle.
that's what I was gonna say. Like interfere. Sorry.
Oh, okay,
Glue it to the
so
back.
what kinds of things
And you
might
make
we
another one back
find in first language interference? Oh, you like his hair? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
He's trying this out for his first job interview.
Yeah.
Anyway, can you think of, and I'm going to say, let's see, somebody I know, Rachel. Rachel? Where are you? There you are, Rachel. I want you to tell me something that is very different in English
You glue it.
from your native language. Are you a Mandarin speaker?
Yes, the big difference is the noun singular and the plural. I still sometimes not the
I'm in
Okay.
class. Why am I?
Alright. Now, why
Yeah,
is that?
go.
Why would that be difficult?
Yeah, go.
because we do not have so singular or plural.
You don't?
We don't.
Well, that's an interesting place
Cut it
then that
here.
we could jump on, because Koreans have it, but they may or may not use it. So it's frequently, my wife would be talking about plural things in the singular, and so I go out and make decisions based on the singular only to find out that I got it wrong. But it is first language interference. Now, another one, oops, let me see. So there's a good example. Emma. Emma. Do you speak Spanish, Emma? You're off again.
Yes, sorry.
Do you speak Spanish regularly?
I kind of do.
Kind of do. Now,
I
here's
grew
a
up
question.
with family.
Yes, with family. Okay, that makes sense. So what is a big difference between English and Spanish that causes trouble?
Like some adjectives can come before or after the noun.
Very good.
So
So different
Over
rules.
here.
Consider your first
Oh, yeah.
language interference. Let's
Go away.
think here. Anybody else speak another language? Michaela, are you a Tagalog speaker, perhaps?
Yes, I am.
What's different about English and Tagalog?
We
Hello.
don't really differentiate between gender when like saying he or she. There's no difference.
I would suspect that if we asked that of Rachel, she might say the same. Because I've had lots of Chinese students in my day, and they seem to have a real trouble between he and she. And even my wife, after 40 years, some trouble. All right. Nonetheless, we look at these and we go, what's the importance of first language interference? Well, it helps us figure out some places where our students might need extra help. For instance, lots of languages don't have articles. And if we know that our student is Polish, or our student is Vietnamese, or our student is Chinese, or Korean, or Japanese, they don't have those articles, and they are going to struggle with those, much like Michaela talks about gender between Tagalog and English, or Rachel was talking about plurals or not plurals. Those are different things. And so the idea here is to recognize that people may in fact fall into specific categories of the things that are going to be natural mistakes and very hard to overcome. This might be a great place to use the rapid drills we talked about a little while ago, right? So consider the first language of your students, and consider, and as you go along, if you start to have more and more students of one language background or another, you begin to notice what seem to be the natural mistakes that they make, because it's hard to switch from thinking in your native language over to English or vice versa. Simple exercises are okay. They don't have to be difficult. Multiple choice is not useless. I mean, a simple exercise like that is actually a quick way for people to be able to recognize and respond. Sometimes we can do that with few distractors. So instead of having A, B, C, D, and E, where E is A, B plus C or all the other things,
Not
keep
now.
it
I'm
simple.
clueless.
Students have a lot of learning that they can get from just the simple exercise. And they've got a lot to learn by being able to repeat and demonstrate repetition on a particular grammar line. We already talked about this. I'm sorry, my mouse has gone flake. Use the board to help visualize patterns. Go back to what we talked about in number 6. Or go back to what we talked about in number 1. But first, let's talk about number 6. The place to build those consolidated lists where we're really focusing on just one thing or another. The board is a great place to do that. You could, for instance, say, well, you know what, our lesson today is prepositions of time and location. And you can put all of the time variables or time prepositions in one column and all of the place or location prepositions in another column. And then you're going to realize suddenly that you've got some of these that are going to cross over, like in and at and on, for instance. So by having those laid out, the patterns laid out on the board, it should help your students begin to grasp the difference and be able to work through it. Now, I used this one with you once before. Let's see if you figured this one out yet. There's a simple rule for using not, and I showed it with this pattern. Got lots of little sentences. I negated every sentence. So we have not in each one of these. What is the simple rule for using not? Mandy, do you remember? Can you look at this pattern and tell me what is the simple rule for using not? Just look at the sentences. Where is not?
Can you go? I'm just
You can say you don't know and I'll move on.
I don't know.
Okay, then I'm gonna look at this. Who's next on my list? K. Dukes. What is the simple rule for where not goes in these sentences? All you gotta do is look at it.
Is it like after the auxiliary verb, like, or am I?
That's pretty close. Am in that case is not an auxiliary verb though, right? In the case I am not human,
Yeah.
that's actually a main verb.
Yes.
So what are you gonna say?
So that's the one messing up my guess. I don't know.
Okay, but it's not, you're not far. It comes after, reword those. Teresa, where does not go? Okay, Kayla, it's up to you.
Sorry.
Oh, you got it? You don't have it, right? Kayla, look at these sentences. Where does the not go?
There are things they're gonna do in the future. I will, I should.
But what about I did? Doesn't fit that pattern. Okay, I'm gonna give it to you. Here's the deal. You look at this and you go, not comes after the first verb. Is there any place in there where it doesn't come after the first verb? If it's the main verb, like am, I am not. If it's an auxiliary, as Kay was talking about, true, it comes after the auxiliary. In this case, the first auxiliary. How about will? Well, will and should, those are kind of modal verbs. Where does it come from? Go then, after the first verb, whether it's modal or auxiliary or main. Just look at that, and you can see the pattern. Hopefully, your students will have better luck with it. But patterns are important because if they can learn that, then they can know on any sentence where they're going to put not. And they don't have to wonder about it. So that's the idea. Yes?
Are we going to make a presentation today?
Nobody's making presentations today. I had that wrong in the task list, but as I showed on the PowerPoints the last couple of days, we're going to do them on Wednesday and Monday.
Oh, okay.
Not comes after the first verb. So, patterns. If you can teach them a pattern, they can apply it 1,000 times. And it's not 1,000 discrete pieces of information that they have to remember. And that's the way you learned it. That's the way I learned it. That's the way we used it. We follow systematic patterns almost all the time. So, use songs to practice. Schoolhouse Rock. You'll remember the only one I know of anymore is conjunction junction. But hey, I had to learn Spanish, and I had to learn irregular past participles. And I had to learn at these past participles that are irregular by singing these words to the sound or to the tune of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. I promise I won't do it for you here, but I will remember these forever. Okay? You can make your students remember stuff forever. This is just one of the ways. All right. Be careful with false beginners. You will probably get people in your classes who want to act like they don't really know so that they can start off at the basics where it's easy. Be careful with false beginners. Give them additional items so that they can rebuild their skills quickly. I took Spanish in the 8th and 9th grade, back in the 60s, right? Actually into the 1970s. So 68, 69, 70, I took Spanish. I didn't learn squat, I thought, until I decided to take Spanish again when I was 50. And then I found out how much stuff I actually do. And I could really race ahead of the other students in the class. Well, I was a false beginner. I started at the lowest level class. I could have gotten through it in a fourth of the time. But watch out for these guys and utilize them in your class. When you do group work, hey, take somebody who's a little more advanced and let them work with somebody just a little bit behind. And use pantomime. Don't be concerned about the fact that you might look a little silly. We use pantomime all the time. And I do it. And for instance, when I'm doing past tense, I'm always going like this. Sat down, sat, pointing to the back. Past tense or present progressive. where I'm actually moving when I'm trying to get them to understand the difference between eat and eating, or walk and walking. Third person singular. You can go one, I am, that's not a good one. I talk, you talk, he talks. So recognizing that that's that third person singular in the present tense. You've got all of this stuff at your disposal. You don't have to have any extra equipment to use pantomime in a lot of the areas that you're going to try to teach. Now, this is the second half, and what I want to do is I want to say multiple choices can teach. They are not just for testing. I've said many times, I like my tests to be a learning experience, not just an assessment experience, but something that helps people learn, find out what they know, see what they don't know, and force them to go out there and try to figure it out. Multiple choice questions are kind of like that. They can learn a lot from seeing in a multiple choice question what the answers are not. That's called negative evidence. Negative evidence is something sometimes gets lost. We focus a lot on positive evidence. This is the way it should be. This is the way it's supposed to be. This is how you do it. But there is value in learning this is the way you don't do it. This is not the way you should do it. Negative evidence helps them differentiate the correct from the incorrect. And those are valuable things to know. And one great place to do that is in multiple choice questions, and to a lesser degree, true and false questions will help them do the same thing. But multiple choice makes them focus on several possible answers, and seeing some that are negative, very commonly displayed by your students, by the way, helps them to begin to differentiate the wrong from the correct. State the number and types of errors in editing exercises. I don't know if you found that helpful in the workbook, but I did. I was a teacher, and I found it was good to know that I'm looking for 10 errors in this thing, and that's the 10 errors that I'm going to find. If I only got 9, I know I got something wrong. If I got 11 or 12, I know I also had something wrong. Stating the number and types helps focus your students in on what they're really supposed to look for, and it helps them to know what they should be looking at so that they can self-correct to a certain degree. Stating the number of items or the types of errors makes the question a little bit easier, but it also helps with self-correction. So don't feel bad about using that. People have asked me, hey, I know they did this on the midterm. Somebody asked me, hey, are we going to have one of each kind of verb type in those questions? And I said, yes. So you knew that you've got 5 verb types. If you've got 4, you're looking for the 5th one. You can look on a sheet of paper and see what you're missing. So knowing what you're supposed to be looking for and what you're likely to find can be very, very helpful. We talked about patterns already. Sometimes you want to apply patterns to large chunks of information when it's very difficult to try to figure out and get your hands around lots and lots of information. Patterns are helpful. You probably speak 1,000 sentences a day. You don't have to think about it, but your students have to think about, where do I put not in the 250 negative statements that I make in a day? Or where do I put not, even if I'm only making 10 negative statements a day? 1,000 sentences a day is a large chunk of data. Get them down focused on the pattern, and they don't have to remember it 1,000 times. They remember the pattern, and they learn how to apply the pattern. Seeing the grammar points is not a bad idea. Again, you've got PowerPoints, you've got movies perhaps, or videos that show the grammar point in use. You've got the blackboard. You know that you've got students, and some of you are probably ear learners. You listen and you learn from what you hear. Then you've got people like me who don't learn very much that way. I learn a lot more by seeing it. And when I'm trying to work in a foreign language, even seeing the word makes a great deal of difference in learning it rather than just hearing it. Because if you were not an English speaker, you might find that there's not a big difference between set and sat. If you're an English speaker, you know there's a big difference. You hear it right away. But if I go to Korean and say "ge" and "ga," it's not going to be that clear anymore. It becomes a bit difficult to understand it because you don't have the context to know what's being said. See the grammar. I could put up "ga" and "ge," and you could see that they're spelled differently. I could put up "set" and "sat," and you can see that they're spelled differently. And that's helpful, particularly for your visual learners. One thing, and haven't had this problem in our exercises that you've turned in so far, but break up the lessons. Don't try to cover everything at once, particularly you guys who are going to be teaching a lot of little kids. You're going to know that they have shortened attention spans. They may not be able to sit and listen to think about the trouble they'd have listening to me for an hour and 15 minutes. They'd tune me out after 5. You guys at least go 10, but that's okay. Now, break up the lessons. Maybe you only want to cover one simple point now, and tomorrow you'll cover it, review it, and then cover the next one. But don't try to cover everything at once. It doesn't work very well. And then there are gimmicks. Now, I told you back here for patterns in learning large chunks of data, I said C18. Well, here's 18. Gimmicks help all learners. Tell me, guys from grammar class, what's a gimmick that you learned? And if you didn't learn it here, but you saw it again when you were here, what kind of a gimmick have you learned? I'm going to change pages so I can look at different faces. Ishara. You learn any gimmicks in this class? Anything that help you remember?
Let me think. Well, I know a gimmick, but
Say again.
I said like I know one, but I'm not sure if we covered it in class, which was like the fanboy.
That's the one I was thinking of. That was the one that I was thinking of. Comes up in grammar classes. We've talked about it. You've seen it before in your earlier life.
Yeah.
But it's something that helps you remember. Fanboys. Go ahead. Somebody else was going to say something?
No, that was it. I'm sorry. That was my bad.
Okay, that was you. I got it. All right. So there's one. Here's one. In a normal sentence, what comes first, the direct object or the indirect object? Well, the way,
Direct object.
I'm sorry, Rachel?
I was going to say that.
Indirect object, I think.
They're objects. Which one comes first?
Indirect.
Indirect object, right? How do you remember that? I had to figure it out for Spanish. Same thing happens in Spanish. How do you figure that out? My gimmick was ID. Everybody has to have an ID, an identification card. ID is the way that I remember indirect comes before direct in a straightforward sentence. And so that's something that I picked up along the way. I before E except after C. We probably all learned that one in spelling. All of these things are things to help you remember. If you spell the word together, what goes on in your mind when you spell the word together? Anybody, somebody, I know they do it. How do you do it?
You're out together.
Together, exactly. I don't remember together. Every time I spell it, I say in my mind, it goes to get her. Same thing with separate. What do you suppose that is? There is a rat in separate. I never try to put the E where the first A goes. Gimmicks are not a bad thing. We've kind of talked about this a little bit before. It's kind of a slightly different focus. Keep focused on one item at a time when you're talking about grammar points. Don't mix up adverbs and verbs when you're trying to explain verbs. Just get a good solid handle on verbs and then move on to adverbs and how they interact. Or if you're talking about sentences, focus on simple sentences before you move to compound sentences. Do compound sentences separately from complex sentences. Try to keep these things separated so people get a good handle around the individual entities. And once they've done that, then maybe as the summative testing, you begin to see, are they able to differentiate, utilize this? Use guided, did I skip too many? Oh, mnemonics. This is another one, memory gimmicks. My ID and fanboys are really mnemonics, but the idea here is gimmicks, things that will help them remember. Motivate with a challenge. I bet some of you probably put that in your presentations or in your lessons, even if it's just putting two groups of people together in two different teams and having them compete for something. That's a challenge. The book uses the idea, well, I don't think you're ready for this, but here, I'm going to tell you about it anyway. Some people will latch onto that. Oh, I'll show you I'm ready for it. And so things that you can do with your students. Let your students write quizzes and exercises. How many of you have done that before? Okay, Aiden, what did you find with the student written practice quizzes and exercises?
Do you mean have I assigned it or have I done that?
Oh, either one.
Okay, yeah. I think when you're asked to prepare something for somebody to actually teach something, it really makes you analyze it differently.
Okay, it makes you analyze it differently. But I bet you some of you have actually either been the person who had to come up with the quiz questions, or you were a teacher or a teacher's assistant and made other people do it. Do you remember anything going wrong with that? The thing that I've always found going wrong with that is students tend to actually oftentimes make things much harder than I would have made them. They ask very detailed things because they can find them easily, and they go out there and they really, there's a question. Sometimes they do it way too easy, but my experience has been most of the time, the questions that they come up with may be too difficult. And so this is something you have to use a little bit judiciously and make sure you're reviewing some of the things that they come up with before you hit the other students up with them. Find grammar points in authentic materials. I mentioned this once before as in authentic activities, but also authentic materials. How do I use the at preposition with a train schedule? Well, the train leaves at 5:07. It will be at Round Lake at 5:22, blah, 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 blah. Okay? Find grammar points. Those authentic materials are okay. Same thing with menus is another great example. Use guided writing activities so ELLs begin to understand the connection between grammar and writing for understanding. I suspect that we all have done that. We're all continuing to do activities that revolve around writing, and depending on the level of our students, they are more or less guided. But given ELL students guidance on this, walking them through things in little chunks will probably be helpful for them. And then this one's kind of boring. Develop a consistent system for marking grammar errors in writing. If you're anything like me, you made a lot of grammar errors in your writing, and your teachers probably used similar thoughts like AWK for awkward and SVA for subject verb agreement and I don't know how you do it, lack of parallelism and so forth. Develop your own and get your students used to it. Saves you time, saves them time. So once again, don't forget about the exam on Wednesday. Bring it with you so we can talk through it, and it'll be due a week from tomorrow. And that covers what I wanted to talk about today. We've got, my plan is on Wednesday, we're going to talk a little bit about the test. We're going to do 3 presentations. If I remember correctly, Deshara and Aisha have already called out to be the first ones to do it. So they're team number 1. They will do it first. And I believe it's Teresa and Rachel chose position number 2, correct? Is that right? And that leaves us with probably a third one. Anybody want to? Okay, Emma had her hand up. Emma, I'm sorry. Hey, Kayla, or I'm sorry. Yeah, Kayla, do you want to be first on Monday? Okay, very good. So we're going to have Monday will be Kayla. And number 3 tomorrow, assuming we get there, hopefully we will be Emma and is it Mandy? Emma and Mandy working together? Okay. And that would leave us with Kay Dukes and Aiden as cleanup, as it were. All right? Don't forget the evaluations, please. I'll give you the extra point just to get you to do it. Do it early rather than late. In fact, wow, you've got 8 minutes. You could go right to D2L and do it right now, and I would never know, and you'll have it done, and I won't hassle you anymore. What could be better than not being hassled by John Armour? Nothing. That is like the peak. Okay, now I'm going to stay here and answer questions for anybody who has them. And otherwise, I will see you on Wednesday with Aisha and Deshara leading off, Teresa and Rachel in the middle, and Emma and Mandy as team number 3. We good?
Good.
Yep, everything's all good.
Okay, so now, questions. If you want to stay, you can. If you don't have to.
Bye.
Bye. So long. Rachel, you had a question.
Yeah, did you go to